The world is waking up, and you finding your way here today is no coincidence. The spirit world always has a way of guiding us where we most need to be at the absolute perfect time. I'm your host, Lindsay Morlock, and you're listening to the Guided Podcast, where we explore how the spirit world works on our behalf to guide us along our paths. This is where you'll learn how to live a life that is both conscious and connected, so you can supercharge your pathway to healing and open to life's magic and miracles. Come along this journey to see how guided you truly are. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Guided Podcast. I'm your host, Lindsay Morlock. And before we dive in, I want to share that this episode touches on my lived experience, one that I've mentioned previously. I'll be revisiting certain moments, not to rehash them, but simply to illuminate the deeper spiritual teachings that emerged as a result of them. Because today isn't really a story about what happened, it's a story about what has healed. So today's episode is for anyone who's ever felt the weight of someone else's refusal to acknowledge your pain. When their silence left you carrying the emotional burden for both people in the relationship. This is about what happens after the wound, about that sacred moment when you stop waiting for repair and start giving yourself what you've always deserved. In the most recent episode I released called Spiritual Abuse and Permission to Heal, I talked about the many ways I found closure and healing within myself after a relationship rupture. But there was one piece I didn't speak to because I felt like it deserved an episode of its own. And today, I want to talk to you about what to do when an apology never arrives. Because an apology, at its core, is one of the simplest and most profound acts of care. Even if you don't fully understand or agree with someone's experience, an apology is something that still says, I care about you. I care that my actions have caused you pain. And that matters. That counts. Because when you've been hurt in a relationship, it's only human to long for repair, for some sort of acknowledgement. Offering an apology when harm has occurred isn't complicated. It's a basic act of humanity. And when apologies never come, you don't just feel the absence of accountability. You feel the absence of care. It's a withholding of empathy, a silence that almost echoes louder than the words. For me, it felt like a refusal to offer love where love once lived. And that's why I've come to so deeply value apologies, not the performative kind, but the ones that genuinely acknowledge impact, especially in relationships, especially when someone else's choices leave a mark, whether or not that was their intent. In my case, I never received an apology. What I did receive bypassed everything I thought we both valued. That moment, the absence of empathy, the avoidance, it became its own kind of answer. And while that hurt, it's not what this episode is about. This episode is about what came after. Now, to be clear, there are different kinds of hurt and harm. There's the obvious kind when someone's actions are mentally, emotionally, physically, or spiritually hurtful or abusive. But there's another kind that often gets confused that doesn't always require an apology. And that hurt is when someone feels activated in response to your truth. And while your honesty may stir something within them, that doesn't mean your truth was harmful. And we have to learn to discern the difference, especially when it comes to our expectations. And in this instance, I wasn't activated by someone else's truth. I felt harmed by what felt like projection, bypassing, and spiritual spin. And when real harm is met with avoidance and then subsequent withholding of repair, it's not just disappointing, it's devastating. But here's where the shift began. Eventually, I had to come to accept a harder truth. That avoidance was the closure, not because of what was said, but because of what wasn't. And that became the turning point. Because when one person refuses to carry their own emotional responsibility, there is always another person left holding the bag. And in this instance, that was me. Until Spirit reminded me, that is, I didn't have to. At first, I thought I needed their apology to be free. I thought I needed acknowledgement to feel whole and to move forward. But Spirit showed me something else. I could write the apology I never received to myself. And I'll be honest, at first I was furious that I had to do more labor, furious that I was the one writing the apology to myself. It felt like another form of emotional overfunctioning, just cloaked in something more spiritual. But Spirit made it clear this was not about them anymore. This was about reclaiming my peace, my healing, and allowing myself to fully move forward. So I sat down, ready to write, and I couldn't. I just stared at the page blankly. Then I felt the emotion surface, more anger, more resistance, because I didn't want to have to be the one to give myself what I believed I deserved to receive from someone else. It didn't feel fair, but that was part of the wound too. Spirit showed me I needed to name what I was still holding. I needed to name the deeper anger. I needed to name the exhaustion. I needed to name the overfunctioning and the laboring. And only then could something shift. So I asked Spirit, can you help me write this letter? And they did. So I channeled a letter from Spirit that became a soul offering to myself, an act of healing, a bridge. And in doing this, I met myself. And truthfully, this letter had more impact. I felt more seen, more heard than I think this person could ever have given me. But I allowed Spirit to help me and support me through the moment that I didn't think I had the strength for. I stopped over-carrying. I let go and I allowed Spirit to support me through it. And what was so beautiful about the letter that they wrote for me was that Spirit was the only energy that had seen the full impact of this experience on my soul. And that is the place that letter met me. That's the place where Spirit met me and I met myself. Because here's what I've learned. It is not your job to seek to be understood by someone committed to misunderstanding you. It is not your job to sit in the waiting room of someone else's evolution. And it is not your job to hold out hope that maybe someday someone will offer the repair that they've shown no signs of giving. Your job is you, to offer yourself the humanity, the love, the respect, and the repair that you deserve. And the most powerful part, when you do this, when you meet your own needs, it sets you free because your healing is no longer contingent on anyone or anything outside of you. And that was the gift, because I was finally able to meet myself with more clarity, more validation than anyone else ever had. And Spirit reminded me too that a person who respects themselves doesn't wait for the outside world to catch up to their own truth. Self-worth does not wait in a hallway. Self-respect does not stand on someone else's threshold. So I didn't. I moved forward. I grounded into my truth. I rooted into my own integrity. How someone else chooses to meet that is no longer mine to manage. What is mine to manage is me, my peace, my boundaries, my yes to myself. So if you're listening to this and thinking, yes, me too, here are some of the messages I hope will meet you where you are. The first is, you are not crazy for wanting to be met. Longing to be seen and heard and validated, that's not weakness. That's your humanity. So don't let someone else's lack of acknowledgement convince you that your needs were too much or that your pain wasn't real. Wanting an apology is not asking for the impossible. It's entirely reasonable to want to be met with care and respect and emotional responsibility. You deserve that. Your desire to be met doesn't make you needy. It makes you honest and it makes you human. Remember that someone else's silence, avoidance, or mistreatment is not a measure of your worth. It's a mirror of how deeply they are willing or unwilling to meet themselves. The truth is that someone cannot acknowledge you if they are unwilling to acknowledge their own contributions to a dynamic. People are always an expression of their choices. They are either choosing love or they're choosing fear. And when someone chooses fear, fear of conflict, fear of intimacy, fear of responsibility, fear of their own shame, fear of their own shadow, their reactions can take many forms: withdrawal, projection, spiritual bypass, even silence. You're never going to fully know what their fear is rooted in. But here's what you do need to know. Their fear has absolutely nothing to do with your worthiness. It has everything to do with what they're unwilling to face within themselves. So don't mistake avoidance for invisibility. The absence of accountability from another person does not invalidate the truth that you carry in your bones. Your experience matters. Your pain is real. Your feelings are valid. And your soul, your spirit knows when harm has been done, even when no one else names it. At the end of the day, we are all accountable to spirit, period. And that remembering, that can really help us to rest easier. Remember that you're allowed to grieve the apology you never got. That grief is real. Spirit often reminds me that grief is just love with nowhere to go. So send that love inward, back to yourself. Grieving an apology that never came is not petty. It's not a grudge. It's your soul mourning the absence of relational care and relational justice. So let yourself cry for what wasn't said, for what wasn't owned, for what never arrived. That grief is not a detour. It's the way through. It's sacred. It's human, and you deserve to give it space. Remember that there's nothing spiritually noble about tolerating emotional neglect. Spiritual maturity isn't about bypassing pain. It's not about being quote unquote above it. It's about honoring your heart, all of it. Sometimes the most sacred thing you can say is, I deserved better and I choose better for myself now. Not from blame, not from ego, but from clarity, from self-respect, from love. It's important to remember that you don't have to do the other person's soul work. It's not your job to carry the emotional labor for both sides of the relationship. I know I've learned this the hard way in many relationships. No matter how empathic you are not responsible for carrying the weight of someone else's avoidance, their fear, or their silence. Let them be responsible for their own evolution. That's how growth happens, when the weight of unacknowledged impact becomes too heavy to ignore. And isn't that the larger lesson unfolding across society right now? But here's the reminder. Don't cushion someone else's karmic consequences with your emotional overfunctioning. Let them carry what's theirs to hold, and allow yourself to carry what is only yours to carry, what is only your responsibility to take. It's important to remember that the apology you offer yourself is not a consolation prize. It's a return to your sovereignty, a reclaiming of your dignity. This is not you settling. This is you coming home to yourself. The most powerful apology you will ever receive is the one where you say, you never deserved that, and I'm sorry you went through it alone. I see you, I believe you, and I will never abandon you again. That is not second best. That is sacred repair. Remember that your freedom isn't actually found in being understood. It's found in being true. You don't need validation from the one who hurt you to heal. What you do need is your own unwavering allegiance to your truth, to stand beside you, even when no one else does. Once you have that, nothing else is required. And if you listened to my episode last week, you'll remember this one, but it bears repeating. Closure is not something someone else gives you. It's something you claim. You don't need someone else's final word. You don't need the explanation that never comes. You need your own yes to yourself. That's where your liberation lives, not in someone else's return, but in your release. This moment, this reclamation is now what I hold space for in my work. Healing doesn't wait for someone else to wake up. Healing starts when you claim it. It begins when you come home to yourself. This is the heartbeat of everything I teach in my You Matter course. And so if you've been waiting for an apology that never came, If you've been holding your breath, waiting for someone to finally see the impact, to name their part, and to offer the repair you so deeply deserve, let me say this. You're not crazy for wanting to be met. It's human to long to be seen and heard and held with care, but you are not powerless in the absence of their repair. Closure, real soul-deep closure, is the most sacred act of self-responsibility. It's the moment when we decide, I am not carrying this any further. Not because it didn't matter, but because you do. And yes, it's okay to grieve, to feel the ache of the thing that never came. But you are not a victim of your circumstances. Even when you feel victimized, that's just the wound speaking. That's the heartbreak, the tenderness, the unmet longing, reaching for air. But your soul knows something deeper. Your soul always knows that this didn't happen to you. It happened for you. Not as punishment, but as purification, as realignment, as the sacred mirror that showed you every place you were still abandoning yourself for love that could never hold you. What happened with me, what happened in my story, yes, it broke me open. It removed the scaffolding I had built around my unworthiness. It emptied me of every illusion I still carried about what love, loyalty, and leadership were supposed to look like. It forced me to come home to myself. And while this has been one of the most painful experiences of my life, it has also been one of the most sacred. Because what came from it was me, my becoming. And I genuinely love the woman I have become as a result of this reckoning. From that place of deep knowing, what remains for me isn't resentment, isn't bitterness. It's just reverence. Reverence not for the harm, but for the truth it revealed. Reverence not for the behavior, but for the role that this person's soul played in my own evolution. And reverence for the way that spirit alchemized all of this into the exact fire I needed to remember who I really am. A woman who no longer begs for crumbs. A woman who no longer shapeshifts to avoid rupture. A woman who no longer silences herself. I'm not waiting anymore. I'm not shrinking anymore. And I'm not negotiating my worth with people who are committed to misunderstanding me. This chapter, this rupture, was my finest hour. Not because of what she did, but because of what I chose. To tell the truth, to walk away clean, to honor my voice, and to live in radical integrity with who I am, what I know, and what I deserve. I share this episode with you because this was a missing link in my own process of finding closure for a long time. A piece of the puzzle that I minimized until I followed the guidance to do it and realized just how important it was. I had to find that strength within myself to give myself everything I needed to heal. This journey is not for the faint of heart, and I won't pretend that it is. But you know what I learned through the process? The heart is deeply resilient. The heart is meant to survive these ruptures. And on the other side, you discover this deep well of inner resourcing, one in which you know without a doubt that you are the only person you ever need to be at peace within yourself. So I want to close by circling back to something that I mentioned earlier, that apology letter. By the time I was at the point in my own healing journey where I needed to write that letter, it just felt like one more step, one more reminder of where I hadn't been met. At that point, I felt like I had given all I had left to the healing journey, and I didn't feel like I could conjure up any more emotional strength to write that apology letter myself. So I had asked Spirit if they would write it for me, and they did. And if you're wondering what that apology sounded like, I've shared it in written form for my subscribers over on Substack. It's tender, it's personal, and I'm choosing not to read it aloud here because it was never intended to be spoken. It was meant to be witnessed, and I feel like it lands differently that way. So if you feel called, you can subscribe to my Substack. The link is in the show notes. And I share this with those of you who might be feeling like your own gas tank is on empty, and maybe, Just maybe you need help writing the letter to yourself too. And so if that's your situation, feel free to borrow my words until you find your own. Because what I've learned is this: when you stop waiting for someone else to set you free, you start to thrive. You start to breathe. And you start to remember that the life you were always meant to live was never going to be built in someone else's home. So if you're holding on, waiting, aching, let this be your permission slip. You don't need their sorry. You just need yourself. And that person is already here. Until next time, bye for now. Thank you so much for listening to the Guided Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, I would be so grateful if you would share it with a friend or even leave me a review so we can ensure that it makes its way into the ears of listeners who need to hear these messages most. Until next time, may you remember how guided you truly are.